I am here with Dr. Nikki Lanier, and I'm Christine Hildebrand, and we're going to jump into a really interesting conversation around racial equity, DEI, and how Black and white women can come together in this time and unify and create friendships, connections, and shared vision around how we build a world and our workplaces to support all people and advance some of the values that we believe are possible and are linked inherently to creating equity and inclusion and belonging for all. So I want to just start off the conversation that way. And Nikki, maybe you can share a little bit about what you feel like an intention or why you think we're coming together in this conversation. And I know there's more than what I just said too.
Yeah. Well, I first of all, I think it is important that just the visual of this example be normalized. So white and black women coming together and talking through concepts that are super important to both of us, and doing so as a conversation and not lecture series or, without the usual friction that tends to come with these kinds of conversations. This is what I want to normalize. So I just want to just take a minute and appreciate and soak in this visual.
I love it.
And then secondly, Christine, you and I have been talking for a really long time about what must be true of the future that we are going to not just inherit, but decidedly, doggedly insist upon
Mm-hmm.
as women through the lens of women. And this is, when I think about the intentions for today, a couple of things come to mind. This is not about bashing men or criticizing, we love the men in our lives and the men in our country. We need strong men. We need the male lens in the same way we need the female lens, but they are very different lenses. And
Absolutely.
that's for a purpose. And so that's what I want to lift throughout our conversation today is just the power of this visual, the potency of understanding and respecting the lens through which we all see the world. We have our individual kind of idiosyncratic, like a Christine lens and a Nikki lens, but we also have like white women lens and black women lens. And then there's the female lens. And then, there's this, I live in the Midwest, you're on the West Coast lens. And so all of that is contributive to the full tapestry of what makes this world so beautifully potent, and so richly impactful. And we have to figure out a way to celebrate that and talk through it without being so clumsy with one another.
Absolutely. And it's also, we're living at such a magical time right now and a huge opportunistic time. We're seeing the emergence of the feminine voice, right? Women's voices. And
Yep.
how this visual of you and I coming together as a Black woman, as a white woman, to what is our shared reality? What is our shared values of what we want to champion together that makes sense,
Right.
for all of us. And I also want to point out too, and I love your point about men and not excluding them, but valuing them for the strengths they bring to the table. But I also have to recognize the fact that we're in a dissemination of a dominant system that's old.
Yep.
All of the old things that are breaking. And when you have a dominant system that is crumbling, but you also don't have the clarity of the emergent system elevated, that is where a lot of feminine and women's characteristics, strengths, and qualities can come in the formation. And this is why it's so important for us as all women of color, white women and women of color, and I want to include my Latina sisters and Asian sisters and Indian sisters and Native American sisters in this conversation, because there is room for all of us. But when we're talking about what we want to create going forward in an emergent system, in a new world, in new workplaces, and in a new reality, how do we bring our sensibilities that we share, that are common to us, and all of the values we commonly care about to create and make sure that whatever is emerging is inclusive of all of our voices? And there has never been a better time for this.
Yep. Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, spot on, spot on. I couldn't have said it better. Christine, what, I mean, as you were talking, there is an undeniable reality, both spiritually and in our world's view, that women are literally and figuratively life givers, right?
Yeah.
That is who we are naturally. We take a thing, give it life, right? So whatever energy sometimes you bring into us, we will take that thing and blow it all out.
Multiply it.
We birth humans. We give life to ideas and to direction. We take a house, we take a construct from being a building, from being a house to a home, because we give life and inject life. That's naturally who what we stand for. And so I think this is no different than the way
Yeah.
that we think about how we can carve out what the new normal will look like in a way that's not the boogeyman, it's not disruptive, it's not the typical narrative that, well, if somebody's winning, then that means somebody has to lose. If somebody has a voice, that means someone else must be voiceless. If you're now telling me as a white male that I'm bad, then that means in order for me to see you as good, I have to swallow that I'm bad. And so that old narrative, those old
Yeah.
false choices is part of what has to be dismantled so that these conversations can become more normalized.
Absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to is a transformation of basically a central idea around I and me to to more of a central idea around a we, and everything is showing us that we need to unify right now. Our planet, our Mother Earth is calling us for unification, unification to solve the issues at hand. And so I definitely feel like we are positioned right now as Black and white women and then never before, in terms of, looking forward at the election that's going to be happening here in the next 45 or 46 days.
Mhm.
What is possible in a new reality for all of us. And so part of why I wanted to come together and that we have been talking over the last couple of years is like, what has to happen in order for us to sit around the table and have a dialogue? And specifically, we're going to be talking about Black women and white women in this particular case, and referencing these different lenses that you're holding, that I'm holding, that collectively we can hold. We don't really talk about the space between
Yeah,
us, right? And what we commonly care about. And
right.
I'm gonna just dive into a story that you once told me about your son. And because I feel like one of the things that you spoke about was that we share a passion for protecting our children, for
Mhm.
protecting our communities, for nurturing our communities, for raising our families, and for being mothers. Whether you are a mother and have birthed your own children or not, there are certain, you have your nieces and nephews or god babies.
Yeah.
You understand that value of nurturing, right? And before I get into the topic of your son, I want to just recognize Black women in general for their resilience over the last 200 years of holding families together, being single head of households, often working many jobs to raise children, with a lot of the men that have not been present in the household to actually support that unit. And I want to just recognize that that has been going on for so long, and that the resilience to be able to hold the unit of the family and the nurturing of children in socioeconomic situations, in cultural situations, in racially charged communities or racial inequity communities, I just am in awe and complete reverence to what Black women have gone through in their journey in the United States. So I just want to say that right out of the
Thank you.
gate.
Thank you for that
Um,
acknowledgement. Thank you. Thank you for that acknowledgement. And I think you can do that, Christine, you can do that because you've been a student of the difference. So even as you're introducing the story that you're about to tell, and the commonality with mothers is this instinctive compulsion obsessive compulsion to protect our children. The only difference along racial lines is protecting them from what and from whom
Yeah.
and with what level of regularity. And
Yeah.
then even when I think about like the role of Black women vis-a-vis Black men, there's really never been a time where the haze of, well, the actions associated with the lingering haze or residue left behind from really entrenched racism. There's never been a time where that's not um, impacted the psyche, like the human body of Black people at the marrow
Mm.
corpuscle level. I talk a lot about the trauma that's kind of passed to us in utero, much like we see it in the animal kingdom,
Yeah.
like things just kind of
Yeah.
come to us through our mother's umbilical cord around this survivorship. And the challenge we have with our Black men oftentimes is that the way they react, the Black men in particular, the way Black men in our country react to that trauma, the way that they have responded and expressed outrage and desperation and anger and hopelessness has always been criminalized. So they're taken from us.
Mm.
And then we're all taught as a consequence, no one cares what you feel. As long as you feel it, let me say this differently. It is better if you have these feelings, feel them on the inside. Don't express them, because the expression of Black anguish and
Yeah.
pain and suffering and desperation and exhaustion, it metastasizes. No matter, like, there's no academic credentialing that I could pursue, there's no zip code I could live in that will insulate me from the reality that as I leave here in the next hour or so, who knows, right? There's always a chance for me, and especially for Black men. And so that's why, like this, not only do we feel like, I feel even sitting here today in 2024, I have this insatiable need to protect both my husband and my son in particular. My daughter, yes, but I know there's a out for her if she were to express in these Louisville streets her worries and her concerns and her pain. There is no out for the men in my life, and I would include in that bucket my 80-year-old father. So we kind of inherently know, I know I'm going off tangent, but just one quick thing before you tell your story. My husband bought water guns, and I think I posted a picture of this on Facebook a while ago, and he bought all these water guns that look way too close to actual like guns. They're white though. So I mean, if you see them kind of pumping it, you can tell it's a water gun. But I said, you can't ever take those outside, right? We have to figure out how to shoot water, either shoot these water guns inside of our home or on the back side, like in the back where no neighbors, nobody can see us. But you can't be in the front of the house. You can't be in the front of the house doing that. And he was like, I know. So
Wow.
those are just some of the things, like how we're always thinking about, I have to be worried about how's my husband being perceived? How is he being experienced? Are the white people that are in community with him feeling safe with him? So those are some of the things that we have to think about in the name of protecting, that many people don't have a lens to. I'm saying all that to say I appreciate that you do. And so when you're talking about this, you have done the work and you've studied and you've leaned in and you've unpacked and you constantly ask the most beautiful questions so that you can understand, what is this lived experience navigation? Because there are differences, at the same time we're chasing down our commonalities. Shutting up so you can tell the story.
No, no. I mean, this is exactly what I want people to hear, because as a white woman, I want to hold space for that. I want to hold a zone of safety for that message to come out and be communicated to me. I want to feel what that's like. That's what, because I have felt that, and you just dropped in an even deeper explanation for me, that I can even more so champion and understand the journey of Black women and want to lock arms with you even more. Because I believe in that resilience. I am made of that resilience. And there is no reason, with all of the resources and the beauty of this country, that is still happening for you. And that's the piece, or for your son, which is the story I'm going to tell, that it's still happening.
Yeah.
And until we collectively, as Black women and white women and all women of color, come together and say, enough of this, it will continue. And this is the power of this conversation and so many other unifying conversations that we need to have. But when we think about it, and I've said this to you when you invited me to be an ambassador of Rare, I'm like, yeah, Nikki, I'll do this with you. But I really feel like what I'm interested in is how Black women and white women can come together,
Yeah.
heal our trauma, heal our shame, heal what lies between us to create something together that is really about a world what we know is possible collectively. And so when I hear the legacy and the DNA trauma that has been passed to you and what you have to protect with the men in your life, because the women are not only protecting their families, they're protecting the men in their lives and constantly in auditing mode and surveillance mode and high alert fight or flight. That on the nervous system biologically is intense on a daily basis. And I don't have that. And it just infuriates me. It brings tremendous sadness to my heart. And it makes me want, like I said, to lock arms with you and all Black women and women of color to make sure that we in this time stand up for change. So the commonality is being a protector of family, protector of community that we both share. So how do we come together around making our schools safe? How do we come together around making sure our children are safe with law enforcement? How do we come together and make sure that our children have equal access to educational opportunities, economic opportunities? If we're not doing it for ourselves and championing ourselves and our fellow sisters in the workplace right now, how are we doing it for our children? And this is a huge thing that I believe in the next presidency, we ought to really rally around. But let me just tell this story about your son because it gave me new appreciation for a mother who also has a son who is a white son, but your son travels from Louisville to Atlanta, right? To
Mhm.
Georgia for
Yeah.
school.
Now this was happening when he's 29 now, so this is when he was in college. He was in school in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he has to deal with this still, but so you told me that you made him a lanyard that had a clear plastic sleeve that he wore around his neck when he did this traveling from Kentucky to Georgia in the car.
Yeah.
And that lanyard had, I am Justin Lanier or Justin Jackson.
Uh-huh.
And I am a student, I am a straight A student at Georgia Tech or wherever he was going to school.
And SCAD. He was at SCAD, yeah, Savannah College of Art and Design.
Okay. And I am a student traveling to college from my hometown in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm going to ask you to describe like why you did that and what it was. But what I heard from that was that you went to work and every single time he would be on that trail driving back to school, that you didn't feel like you could actually focus on work until you knew he was safely at his destination. And that's something that it was not just like worried about the normal thing that parents worry about. Oh, is he going to get into a car accident? No, this is about whether he would be pulled over as a Black man driving a car from one state to the next in the South, whether he would lose his life.
Yeah. 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 Listen, we still live in a world. I mean, I know a lot of people, white people specifically, don't maneuver, don't navigate, don't exist in a world where you don't exist in a world where what you look like could get you killed because of what someone has assigned, the value assignment that they have given in any given moment to what you look like. Or at least not in an evergreen way. Like race has always been, in our country, that has always been the case with Black and brown people. There's never been a time we've been here where we couldn't have lost our lives because of our skin color, to include today. And so when my son was driving back and forth to Savannah, his father, my husband at the time, bought him a nice car because he was an incredible student, so he earned it. So he got a nice car, and we knew that was just going to be a magnet in ways that are not necessarily going to be healthy for him, perhaps. So I made him this lanyard. I called it the police pouch, and inside of the lanyard, there was his driver's license, his insurance, his and like a little registration, a copy of registration, and like a little card. I typed up a card that said, "My name is Justin Jackson. I'm a student at SCAD. I'm there on scholarship. I am the son of Vince and Nikki Jackson. That was my last name at the time. And they are both gainfully employed. I have never been to jail or prison. I've never been in trouble with the law. I'm just traveling to go back and forth to school." And I also put a family photo in there. And my thought was, when he is pulled over, not if, when he's pulled over, he certainly can't reach, right? So that's why it's around his neck. I don't want him reaching for anything. I want his hands visible at all times. And so it was instructed by me to just point to the pouch around his neck when the police officer needed whatever he needed. Everything right there is in the pouch. Now, the reason why I included that card describing who Justin was to disrupt the narrative. Because what I know to be true, Christine, is that whether we want to admit it or not, we all understand inherently that along lines of race, and especially along the Black-white dynamic, like that's the most evergreen chasm in our country of relationships, white people to Black people, is the worst than any other race experiences en masse, as long as it's been a problem. It's always been that Black-white deal. And so on that dimension, we know inherently that some of us come out of the womb mattering, i.e. white people, because white people decide mattering, and can mobilize efforts and resources against it. And some of us come out of the womb mattering contextually. So we matter, but only in the board meeting, or only at work, only in these circumstances. So it's a contextualized mattering with footnotes and caveats and those kinds of things. And so I just don't know what that lived experience of that police officer is who might be stopping my son. I don't know where they grew up, where he might have grown up, he or she might have grown up, or what experiences they might have had. I don't know what they might have been taught, but I can rest assured that they weren't taught much about us and our experiences. And that inside of that chasm, lots of people are fed a narrative about what Black and brown people are that is all about stereotypes and judgments, and not about really understanding laws, policies, rules, customs, and norms that gave rise to a lot of how we have been conditioned to respond to being muted, marginalized, and stunted. So I just didn't know. I just didn't know what the police officer's experience might have been before he even met my son. Did he ever experience any Black people? Did he have a bad day? Because I just didn't want any mess.
Right. No. It's
Now, however, I also included a photo of him, a family photo, because if things went awry in that stop and somehow my son is either harmed or killed, I wanted that police officer to know that left to mourn him or left to be impacted by what you have done to this human is a family.
Yeah.
Not a stereotypical whatever, not a blah, 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 but there is a family unit waiting for him to get to his destination safely. And so I wanted to give that, I wanted to take the boogeyman out of what Black mama looked like, or Black daddy, or Black what. Nope, this is our family photo. I wanted to normalize his humanity even in that moment. And so he used it quite a bit. Going back, he hated it. Like, he doesn't even want to talk about it now. He just felt like I was tagging him. Like, I've just got to wear this stupid tag. And he absolutely, absolutely hated it. But I will tell you, that's just the reality. I mean, my dad, my cousin and my father, now, I have a lot of family in Atlanta. And so, as you know, my mother just recently passed. So my dad's kind of down there trying to figure out what life looks like without her. And since she has passed, my cousin decided to drive him up here to me in Louisville to spend some time. And they got stopped 3 times, twice coming here and once going back. Now, he
Yeah.
also has a very nice car with tinted windows and two black men driving. So there was, my dad told me there was one of the stops, so there were three police officers sh surrounding the car before they can even let the window down.
That's
So
incredible.
that,
I feel like these are the things, Nikki, number one is like, how can we model that these kinds of conversations and your stories need to be shared with other white women? I mean, I'm listening because I'm interested and I'm curious, but by hearing the depth of the worry that you have or what your dad just went through just trying to come visit you 3 stops. I mean, I could probably drive from here to New York City and not get stopped once.
yep,
And it's just not okay. It's profiling. It's just not okay. Not that we're talking about like what we feel like the solutions are in this conversation. It's really about like how can we come together as
yes,
women that care about our families, that
yes,
care about the people that we love, our children, our units, as you said, put in that photo, to also care about your family. How can I care about your family as a white woman and stand up for your family as a white woman? But we
yeah,
need to be able to come together and have these conversations. And I think it started when you came to Oakland, California, and I was emceeing the HR West conference, and I interviewed all of the speakers. I was the MC, and I interviewed all the speakers because I wanted to get to know. And that day you were speaking, you come up to me and you're like, Christine, I don't feel good. I can't, I don't think I can stand. And I said, one moment, please.
you did.
I
You
was
did. You did. That was a crazy time.
I
Oh my God.
wasn't the producer, but I was going to make sure that you were comfortable. And so I made them change the entire stage set, put chairs up there so that you delivered what you needed to deliver, which was amazing. Um, for the first time in my mind, hearing the link between racial inequity and economic opportunity that we have missed as a country, um, which Nikki talks about this a lot. And if you haven't heard, we're not going to go into a lot of it right now, but it's so super important. Anyway, why don't you describe that? Because then our relationship kind of blossomed. I think there was an instant affinity for each other. At least I felt that had nothing to do with um I loved your message and I wanted to hear more. And and then it started, this conversation where you invited me onto Rare. And then we did an event this last Martin Luther King in Berkeley, California around Rare on the Road.
Yep.
And um and also like navigating, our own connection in, again, me wanting to help you with this, not only this event, but also the logistics of the event and making sure, like, as I would do, like normally, a friend, someone I cared about, like, do you need a ride or can I pick you up at the hotel or can we pick up food together? And all of those different things that we do in connection with each other. So I just feel like it is, we have to, as white women, and I'm just going to call on my white sisters for a second, to extend generosity, take the step to extend generosity, extend understanding, even in the face of maybe it not being received or it not being welcomed, but to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because I found in you a receptive heart, um, because I felt like you felt my intention was pure and that you could trust it. Anyway, I just want to maybe just speak about like how how we can connect to start having these conversations to even get at the greater understanding about your experience that have to happen, but something has to happen actually before that.
Absolutely. Christine, I think what makes our friendship so powerful and everything that we that we're building together in our friendship since we met, I guess, 3 years ago at this point. Um, the first thing that I think is important to recognize is that both of us, independent of one another, apparently, um, made a decision to actively disrupt default inertia that's playing out in our own minds. And so you first have to understand that we have all lived in an inheritance and the inheritance of a lie about each other along race-based lines. Um, this lie that all blank are blank, right? We all have inherited a certain line about that that informs us either quietly or loudly. When I started Harper Slade, my racial equity corporate facing business, um, I knew that I had to, Nikki, as the CEO, I have got to figure out, first of all, how do I feel about white people? Like, what is that? I've never asked myself that question out loud and like write it down. What are the emotions and where did they come from? Do they serve you now in any capacity? And what might the encumbrances be that those emotions will feed in your work to advance racial equity with white people, right? So the customers of, yeah, I mean, corporate facing, we have whoever's in in our trainings. There may be black folks and brown folks in the training, but to be clear, this doctrine of racial equity, we're trying to wrangle largely from white people.
Right.
And so what I can't do and what I won't do, because this is divinely ordered to me, is do that unkindly. Be in that place where I'm using harmful words and a harmful intonation or reckless posturing of my arguments, eviscerating hearts and minds, peddling guilt and shame. I will not do that. Not because, for a number of reasons, but primarily because it's not effectual. Like there's no value in that. There's no learning in that. There's no growth in that. There's just the clapback and the working in and walking out my emotion at the expense of another human being. And that's basically what racism is. And so I can't, in the name of promulgating racial equity, be as unkind and mean as racism is. So it has to feel like a different invitation. That means I have to genuinely lean in to a different orientation. So Nikki, you have to seek out connections, choose to trust, decide that you will have more white friends, white women, white men. You will have more friends and you have to be open to that. And just ask for downloads around discernment and judgment and wisdom and how that's going for both parties. But you have to be open to that. So I came to my experience with you when we first met with that backdrop.
Yeah.
Right? Which is different than how a lot of Black women come into spaces with white women, because it's just not choices that they've yet made or are willing to make or even know they need to. Because we all, the Nikki that you would have seen when in my 20s and 30s would not have even been bothered. I wouldn't even ask you, not because I wouldn't have trusted. I just would have assumed, oh, this is a white woman. I just would have let the narrative do what it does. Right?
Yeah. But this is a really good point, though, because if we both allow the narrative to keep perpetuating, that inherently is what separates us.
Yep.
And so by breaking that yourself, but also, I was raised in the inner city San Francisco from Spanish heritage. I was raised around a lot of people of diversity. I have felt often that I am one of the diverse, not white affiliated, even though I look white. So I haven't really felt that sense of not belonging to women of color. But yet I have felt outside of being included in that.
Yes.
And so transcending sort of like the narrative of may have been thrown at me and being around, well, I've been around diverse and progressive mindsets and communities, thankfully, in my life. but I also feel like I have to be okay making a mistake and going into groups of Black women or women of color and just trying to exist and enter those spaces with an honest and a pure intent.
Yep.
And hopefully will be received with women ready to do the work. But now I want you to just speak to, like, how do your Black sisters actually be ready to receive someone like me who is earnest and wanting to create connection and believing in our shared unity and vision and really wanting to work together? And what has to happen with Black women to be able to trust and receive that, do you think?
That is the hardest nut to crack, Christine. And I know I wish I could give you a better answer, because I know you've been challenging me on this very question, because this is where your heart lies. Like, your heart hungers for that Black-white connection, Black-white women connection. And I think there's Black women, I mean, I certainly can't speak for all, but by and large, we are in search of what feels like the most elusive exhale, right? We're in
Yeah.
search of the exhale. And in any, like, home, family, community, workplace, it's almost always about the inhale for a number of reasons. Our life navigation, what we've inherited, the narrative, stuff we make up, stuff that actually happens, the constant bracing, right? There's just always this inhale. And our conditioning is the exhale for us is found, well, I think this is true of most people. The exhale is found almost only in
Yeah.
circles of sameness.
Yeah.
Because
I would
inside
agree.
of that, right? Inside of
Yeah.
that
And
sameness,
I witnessed that at Rare
there,
Life when I went to
right?
Louisville. I witnessed that because there's safety, and that's the other thing I want to respect. Like, going in up to a group of Black women when I feel like I belong with you, but then that I don't. And to be respectful of not penetrating that zone of safety for you guys that
Yeah.
you feel with each other. But I admire it so much. I admire the sisterhood. I admire the shared experience, the camaraderie that I witnessed. I admire the laughter, the yeah, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's just I can be, I guess, like, I don't need to be of it, Nikki. I mean, because I don't want to take anything, but yet I also feel like, where can there be, like a Venn diagram where we overlap in the middle of a zone of safety, right? Where you have yours, not necessarily I want to keep, the white bubble, because I just don't feel like it's constructive. But there's a place in the middle that's safe for both of us.
And I think for me, though, what helped with you in particular was before we physically met for the first time in Oakland at that event, we had spoken before. We did
Yeah.
a call like this, and you were sharing with me your journey, your life story, your background, your own independent rooting around multiculturalism and your heritage and the work that you had done, and that began that helps to me for me in thinking of you as someone where the exhale can live. And
Oh,
so I don't know that that's always the case. And so, yeah, I just don't know that that's always the case with Black and white women dynamics, especially when even current day, there's just so many examples of white women, whatever that avatar looks like, and you're conjuring in your head, who have intentionally caused harm in Black households with either Black women or Black men, calling the police or eviscerating career moves or being impediments to the work, or like we include all of us, everyone that I know, every Black woman I know can trot out 10, 15, 20 stories of how white women have done something to them or done something to someone in their family, like done something
Mm.
happened. And so that contributes to an already existing narrative. So you got that
Right.
coming in.
Proof points.
Right. And so that's
Yeah.
why I'm like, I know you hate when I say this, but I'm like, that is a harder nut to crack. And so the work really in dismantling racism, softening hearts and minds around racism is really white to white, white
Okay.
people to white people, not white people to black people.
Okay, so I'm going to speak to my white sisters around that because there's a couple different things that I feel like is on our job to be responsible for that. And I appreciate what you're saying and I don't need to be long and I want to be reverent, revere the connection and the safety that you have. And I will continue, as you know, be an open book to wanting to deepen my understanding and wanting to deepen my level of awareness. And this is where it starts for white women in terms of like women that are listening to this conversation and what we can do as white women to advance racial equity. And as you so beautifully say, right, racial equity is love advancing work.
Right.
And if you are a white woman in this world and you have all the things, you've had the access, you've had the education, you have the proximity, you have the power, and you have the position, then it's our responsibility to do love advancing work. And it includes this in this time. And so I'm calling on my white sisters to specifically take the following steps. One is awareness, and awareness includes educating yourself. Educating yourself, and as you say, that is really just immersing yourself in the history, into the legislation, and everything else that has happened that has created to the reality of where we're living today. The other part of awareness is doing your own self-check, like really being honest with yourself about like, how do I feel about Black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, Israelis, Palestinians, the whole not how do I feel about this? And to do that awareness internally about it, just like you were describing in terms of you had to come to terms with how you feel about white people to do your work at Harper Slade. The second thing is to understand why it's so important that change happen now and how the change that we get involved benefits all of us. And you talk about this so well in terms of the loss in GNP annually by the suppression and access and lack of access to economic opportunities for Black and Brown people, and how we are all losing as a country, how we're all losing to have our police force racially profile Black people. We're all losing. We're all losing that we don't have gun, reasonable gun laws in our country. We're all losing. So it's something that we can all advocate for. So the last thing is what is your role in creating change? And obviously you can't do everything, but how do you get involved in doing your own work? And certainly the organization that you set up with RARE helps white women start with their own plan and influencing their own communities. And so I just wanted to really articulate what is within our power as a white woman to do and to do the work to be ready and present for this kind of unifying connection when it appears, when it happens. And so
Yeah. That's yeah. And I mean, that's the whole premise behind RARE, the Radical Action Advancing Racial Equity for White Women specifically. But it really is built on exactly what you just said, Christine. And I don't want any of your listeners to feel daunted at all by it because the power is in the places you're already in. So this is not about going out and, marching in the streets and upending everything that, quitting your job, moving to, it's not that. It's that you're already parenting. So
right.
understand racial equity and the history of racism so that as you're parenting your children, they're not growing up to be the police officer that's stopping my cousin and dad for three times, or engaging in, not promoting Black people at work and they're not quite sure why, they just don't know that they are ever really ready for promotion, or not hire. Like, so all these atrocities, like we get outraged by all the things that we see in the news about all that is being manifested through white people in the name of racism against black and brown people, but they all had parents. They all got spouses, like the people who are doing these things.
Right.
And I'm like, man, where is the woman in influencing what happened? And we have people who will tell me all the time, and I'm sure you hear this, that even from the white mother's perspective, they believe that not talking about race is probably the best way to deal with it in the house. Like, don't talk about it. When in fact, the default inertia will teach your children a narrative about racism that almost always is harmful. So by the time they're 18 and spat out into college and they're after work, they're like horrible bosses for me to work for,
Right.
or people who look like me. So in the space that you're already in, you're already going to be influencing your spouse because you're going to be debriefing their day when they come home from work, and you're already going to be at the family gathering, and you get a chance to talk to grandma and your brother and your father. Why not learn how to just ask questions, not in an accusatory, like, disrespectful way, but just how can we start talking about the inevitable impact that racism will have on all of us as we march toward 2045, where the demographic changes happen? And then how come we can't have any muscle of comfort where we're discussing this with some sort of regularity in the same way that Black families do? Because we talk about this stuff all the time, all
Yeah,
the time.
and I do think it goes back to awareness and understanding, like, who are the residents in your neighborhood? Who are the children in your kids' classroom, not just the white kids? Who are the families that live in your community, and how are you extending to them? How are you inclusive? How are you advocating for and using your power and position and proximity to investigating and creating DEI initiatives within the community or within the school, or even just reaching out. I remember, in Mill Valley, which was primarily a white community, that we had a Black principal of my kids' high school. And I made it a point to, like, get involved. What do you care about? What do you want to do? Like, what's going on? And I mean, that was a microcosm of race relations right there on campus. You can actually affect your own communities with what we're talking about that's happening on a national level. And so, getting behind him in terms of what he wanted to champion and what he believed in terms of values that my kid and so many of our kids were going to be exposed to was really important. And it was a space for me to influence and support using my power, proximity, and position to advance racial equity in my community through schools. The other place that I feel like I've done it, because I'm a founder and CEO of Cofinity, which is a consulting and coaching company, is that I have access to what's going on inside of organizations. And one day, I'll never forget, I was working with a technology company out in New York. I was looking at what everybody was making in the organization. And I noticed a woman of color was not making the same as another woman or another man for doing the same job.
Mhm.
And I used my power, position, and proximity to say to that CEO, you have to fix this. You have to fix this.
Let me pause and tell you how powerful that is, because it's hard to be both the patient and the doctor, right? At the same time, all the time. And so we talk about this a lot with Rare. When there's a value judgment that we all can make on this, but notwithstanding, when white women talk about any ism, racism, sexism, ageism, any of it,
Mhm.
when you all talk about it, especially en masse, it gets a different level of attention than when we do. And so I think you're absolutely right.
Wow.
It is, uh,
But right,
especially,
what you just said right there, I don't think is widely understood, because,
yeah,
and I agree with you. I can understand that that's the case because of the stigma and the stereotype that actually gets laid over a Black woman when she actually does speak up and use her voice. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot more Black women in the media, on national news networks and television, a lot more. Like in the last 4 to 5 years, we're seeing a lot more, which is so encouraging. But I think that you're right. And then that means that as white women, we have more responsibility to use our awareness about where we're seeing inequity and to speak up on everyone's behalf, not just what is going to advance our personal agenda or our
Yeah.
favor.
Well, but it's also that it's easier to tap into that responsibility if you understand what racism steals from you too, which is one of the reasons why we ask that question so much inside of the collective. Because coming at it through the lens and through the posture of an ally, um, you just have it, there's a different kind of persistence, there's a different kind of fidelity if you're coming through the lens of a leader. I am a co-inhabitant of this planet. I'm a leader in this space. I will not live inside of a world where racism is continuing to eat all of our lunch and have this entire country in a stronghold. And so therefore, on that premise, you have to correct this pay inequity, not as an ally to Jane and speaking on Jane's behalf, you need to pay Jane more, right? Do you see the difference in the posture?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's an important place because it empowers white women. You don't ever have to meet any other Black folks. You may not even know any, right? But when you begin to really understand the tax that racism will continue to have on your life, personally, professionally, on our economy, in our family structures, how it has completely sold us a lie in our education system. It has intentionally misinformed us in our education systems. It has intentionally robbed us of good friendships and relationships. When you stand flat-footed in that, then the posture that you're taking, talking about this everywhere, in my home, absolutely, it will inform how I parent. It will inform how I talk and debrief the day with my significant other. It informs how I talk about what we talk about at Thanksgiving dinner, and it informs how I understand what's happening in our work systems. I'm asking white women to adopt a lens of understanding and reflection in a world that they've not yet navigated or lived in, but understand that in just 21 years, this will also be your world too because of the demographic realities. And by then, it's going to be too late.
Well, and I think, just sinking into listening, and that's, I think the biggest thing that I have learned from you is just asking you questions and listening to what your responses are and to understand your experiences. But I also feel like if you're working alongside a Black woman in an organization, you have a responsibility to that sister. You have a responsibility if you're noticing inequities going on in your own operation, instead of thinking that you live in a finite world where opportunity is not available for everybody and where there's competition. And I know that this reality is going on inside of organizations, and I know that you're advising it, you're helping organizations, and certainly I'm helping organizations. And my part of my work in advancing consciousness inside of organizations is that DEI and racial equity is part of being aware.
Yeah.
It's part of how we're treating each other. And so I would say to my white sisters inside of companies is like, check yourself about how you're treating Black people and people of color inside of the organization. Are
Yeah.
you yielding to their voices in meetings? Are you allowing them to have and contribute in the ways that is bringing their gifts? Do you understand what their gifts are? Have you done the inquiry to understand, hey, what do you want to do with your career and what excites you about your work here? And can you be a champion through just how you're modeling with that colleague, instead of thinking that that person is going to take something from you and therefore needs to be competed against?
Yep. Yep. But you first have to recognize that if you're not aware of how much we fall into that place where we see each other through the lens of the narrative about each other, more than we actually see the person. So like the narrative of Nikki is sitting right here next to me, and there's Nikki. And the narrative of Nikki is she's angry, she's not well educated, she doesn't know how to read well, she's probably a single mom, she doesn't
You mean the narrative that gets projected on you from
yes,
others?
the narrative that we're born into. So when I walk into a space, and when I go to a store, when I go to a workplace, or maybe not the workplace because there's some vetting there, but more often than not, you go into a restaurant, the grocery store, the PTA meeting, you
The
show up,
perception of you just as a Black woman
it's a
is
black
so
woman.
different than
Yes,
potentially who you are.
yes. And that perception for Black people especially has almost always been
Yeah.
deficit rich narrative that we come out of the chute with, come out of our mother's wombs, landing inside of this narrative that now we've got to manage for the rest of our lives.
Well,
And
isn't that what we're talking about though too, Nikki? Is like,
yeah,
how can I transcend that narrative that I feel like has been historically projected onto you and see the person?
you have to, yeah, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about. But you have to acknowledge that there is a narrative, because what's unhelpful that happens with a lot of white black dynamics is I don't see color, totally unhelpful and not even true.
Right, right.
Um, I just treat everybody the same, totally unhelpful and not appropriate, because sameness presumes that our navigation is the same, that we're starting from the same, that we're both in here
Yeah.
trying to deal with, just trying to get the widgets done. But white people have to know that black and brown people's navigation in life and in work is extraordinarily more encumbered. It just is. But we spend so much time fighting about that statement. Like people tell me this, no, you're playing the black card, right? In the same way that men have to recognize that a woman's navigation, especially in the workplace, is inherently different because of the narratives that you're coming in there with that are not you, but that
Mhm.
are assigned to you because that's what society does. It assigns a box to you, and then you have to figure out how to manage yourself either inside or outside of that. So I think that really the power is in first acknowledging, listen, your lived experience, I just don't know. I think we have to say that first. The second thing we have to say is, and I will do the work to know it, because knowing it helps me remediate what's manifested from it that's not helpful to you or the society that I choose to live in,
Yeah.
right?
So tell me, tell me about where you grew up and, did you grow up with parents? What did you guys talk around the table and like getting to know, where did you go to school? Where did you go to college? Tell me about, getting interested in people's stories
Yes.
and so that empathy can be built between us, and being able to ask those questions and not presume that because of someone's appearance or their color of their skin or where they're living for that matter, that you automatically know.
That's
And
right.
I feel like the other thing is that we need to understand and ask more about what Black people need to be successful. What do you need to be successful?
Yep.
What do you need to be thriving? Not anywhere, at school, in companies. What is the specific need that you have? And this is, the equity conversation, because giving everybody the same is not necessarily specifics. It could be, you know, I need to be at work at 9:30 instead of 9 because my two kids or whatever,
Mhm.
like I feel like we need to be asking those questions. What do you need in order to be successful?
And recognizing that sometimes, I mean, not always, there's a difference in that need. I remember working through the pandemic and feeling like I don't know, I didn't know how to articulate to my employer my own specific angst about what was happening with Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery,
Yeah.
and its impact on my work. But that's not just those three souls that lost their life, but it's anytime a black person is slain in the street, anytime there's police brutality, anytime my husband came home the other day and was telling me about how his boss told him that when he when he raises up he sits up in his seat too tall, and he uses his hands to talk, that is scaring the white women in the office. So he can't sit like that, and he has to keep his hands down, right? Like, so those kinds of things,
That's crazy.
right? And so, yeah, it is absolutely crazy. And so that's like recognizing like that is crazy, but it's not out of the ordinary in terms of how Black folks debrief their day. Like, what, it's almost like, what did white people do to you today? What did white people say? Like, it is always that though. It is always the white
Mm.
leader, white manager, white supervisor, white systems. Now, again, I hasten to add, this is not about condemning white people though. I want to be really clear about that. This is condemning racism. And racism is a thing that we've all inherited, and it's in all of us. Me too. All of us got a piece of this thing. It's just a matter of how much we're willing to work it out of us. And it feels as though, for whatever reason, white men, for the most part, have an unwillingness or a not sure how to work it out of them, especially when somewhere in their psyche, I think they understand, they think they benefit from it. So,
Well, because we're also evolving out of the mindset that we live in a finite universe, and that we all can't have abundance.
right.
I this is just something that, I mean, we have enough on the planet. We have enough resources for everyone to be thriving and eating and have access to water and not be dying of malnutrition, or to be educated. We have enough resources, or to have access to healthcare.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a mentality that hopefully we will evolve from as a species, where we live conditionally, and we're not thinking about like we live infinitely, and that all things are possible and anything is possible.
But that's what women uniquely have to usher in. Now,
100%.
because we're naturally inclined to see the world as as in pursuit of that possibility and pursuit of that inevitability. Not only can we see it clearly sometimes, and men can, but we can put in place the infrastructure to make it so. But that's our gifting. That's what we have to help our men in our lives get to, and specifically white men, white women, with your proximity, your know, like, and trust factor with white men on this topic of racial equity is the currency that I will never have.
Yeah.
And it also is the greatest impediment to the way that I can work with them in a way that you can. Like, I can't work with them with the same level of potency that you could, because of that proximity alone.
Yeah. I want to ask you this one final question, and you've heard me say many times that in 2009 the Dalai Lama said at the Vancouver Peace Conference that the world will be saved by the Western woman. And I know he didn't believe it was going to be the white woman, and it's going to be all of us. And so here we are in this time where we're feeling the inertia. We're seeing the rise of a lot of movements that include different factions of women that are championing different parts of justice, right? Around the United States, particularly, but we're seeing it globally. But if we could get it right here in the US, if we as Black women and white women could come together and create a world where democracy and equity exist, think about that ripple effect to all women around the world.
That's it. That's it. That's it.
Because everyone's looking at
That's
us.
it. Yeah.
Everyone's looking at us. So if you're listening to this and you were drawn to get this far in the conversation, you have a role in creating a world that we all, as women, which means that all humans are going to thrive. And so, Nikki, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah. It looks like regular, joy-filled engagements and commingling and connections across racial lines at work, at home, and in the community, that we're not living separately anymore, that segregation is gone, that we are fully integrated. Like, that's not the exception. Integration is not the exception. It is absolutely in the norm. And that there are regular collisions across racial lines where people are bringing into those experiences the fullness of their culture, the fullness of their beautiful idiosyncratic self. Nothing is left at the door in terms of, the kinds of foods that I like to eat and the kinds of music that I like to listen to. And there's no, like, a world that I can't even fathom, but we will get there. And that is where I can come into a space with difference, value the difference, acknowledge the difference, love the difference without feeling like I'm supposed to indict the difference or judge the difference or hold it against a standard that is my reality in order to find value in it. And really choose every day. And this is, I mean, it's a daily mindset renewal. You have to, in order to get to this kind of utopia, but daily convicting my mindset around a new narrative,
Yeah.
acknowledging that I've got one that's not serving me, that I get caught up in spiraling in conversations and mental models and thinking that tells me an old story, and deciding that I'm creating new stories every single day, no matter how hard it is, no matter the wind that's in front of me that might be slowing me down, but I'm not going to stop until I see the inevitability of racial equity and a world where racism has no oxygen to breathe.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I want to be a part of that world, and I want to be a part of creating it with you, and to continue to have conversations like this and to champion the work. I, see the opportunity in our world being around safety and
Yes.
love and appreciation, and that we somehow wake up out of this illusion that we're separate from
Yep.
each other as the human race, and that we adopt the true opportunity of all parts of us as individuals and our collective and individual contributions that are waiting to be expressed without inhibition. So I look forward to that. And I know you and I are both working in our own worlds to bring about that awakening, and collectively working on building the momentum and the tidal wave toward that reality and those realities that we just named. And I'm so grateful for our connection. Come stay at my house anytime you want.
Thank you.
And let's just keep the momentum going, and to continue to fuel each other when we get tired.
Amen, sister. Thank you for
So,
this platform.
yeah, thank you for being here. And if you want to know more about Nikki's work, check out Harper Slade and the Rare Women's Collective. And if you want to know more about my work, check out cofinityconsulting.com. And we look forward to more conversations like this.